Hey, it's your guy Tyrrell back with the interviews. In today's video, we're going to break down the tactical issues that Mikel Arteta encountered in Arsenal's 1-0 loss at Aston Villa. When we break down the game and we do look at the board, we have Arsenal in a 3-4-3 that at times did look like a 3-4-1-2 with Lacazette dropping off a bit deeper against Aston Villa's 4-1-4-1. So first we'll start with how Arsenal looked to approach the game with the ball, and they encountered issues with Aston Villa's shape. Aston Villa looked to press from the front, and the manner in which they did do that was focused on ensuring that David Luiz couldn't get on the ball. So they had Samata stepping out ahead of David Luiz to ensure that he didn't have any passing lanes. And then when you look across the pitch, you have Grealish and Trezeguet, who did swap flanks on a consistent basis, looking to close down the wingbacks. And then in the midfield zone, you had Douglas Luiz looking to block off Lacazette from getting on the ball. And then you had Hourihane and McGinn stepping out into the path of Lucas Torreira and Dani Ceballos. The biggest issue that Arsenal encountered in their attacking play was the fact that they couldn't get the ball to their front three, and that was largely due to the pressure placed on Dani Ceballos and Lucas Torreira. So what you ended up seeing was that those two players were often ahead of that Villa midfield bank, and at times we ended up seeing them dropping off a bit deeper so that they can get involved in splitting lines. So that meant that putting pressure on David Luiz was significant because he does have the passing range to play balls over the Aston Villa defense, and he could still break lines from that center back position. There was hardly much of a press on those wider center backs. Specifically when we look at holding, Samata would look to step into his path if he did push forward, but you could still see that he was blocking off the passing lane into David Luiz to ensure that he couldn't get the ball back if he pressed holding. When you look at the opposite side, the one advantage that Arsenal had down that side was that Trezeguet was willing to try and press both Kolasinac and Saka, and on most cases he was bypassed, and that allowed Saka to get into advanced positions. What we also saw down that left-hand side was that as the game continued, Dani Ceballos was dropping off a bit deeper into the half spaces to get away from McGinn's pressure, and that ended up seeing Saka drift laterally into that pocket of space between McGinn and the wider player in Trezeguet or Grealish, and that ultimately freed up space for Kolasinac to push forward. If Kolasinac didn't step forward with Dani Ceballos dropping off into that space, then you could see Saka pushing into more advanced positions beyond Trezeguet, and he was often an outlet based off Trezeguet's high positioning to try and combine with Aubameyang running off El Mohammadi or Gilbert. And on top of that, there was great understanding in covering another teammate's positioning if they were caught out of position. There was one example in particular where you have Hourihane stepping out into the path of David Luiz, and that does leave Lucas Torreira free in that midfield zone, but Samata was willing to drop off to close down that passing lane, and we saw that in various scenarios throughout that first half. So what you saw up front was that Aubameyang was adopting that narrow left-sided position in between Konsa and El Mohammadi, and then eventually Gilbert. Lacazette was occupying the center backs and dropping off deeper to get on the ball, but when he did, Douglas Luiz was marking him out of the game. And what you saw from Nketiah was that he adopted a narrow position ahead of target, and there were times where he looked to try and make runs in between target and Mings. And then Nketiah's positioning ultimately created space for Cedric Soares to push forward, but even when he received balls out on those wider positions, he was closed down by Grealish and Target, and ultimately didn't offer a significant goal threat. So due to Aston Villa's tactical organization and discipline, Arsenal were forced into deeper positions to create quality moves. You saw David Luiz on two separate occasions, one when Samata was stepping towards him, splitting Hourihane and Douglas Luiz to find Lacazette between the lines. He combined with Nketiah. They slid in Saka beyond Trezeguet, but the cross was poor. And then you saw David Luiz having time to clip a diagonal ball into the path of Cedric running off Grealish, but he was unable to connect with a teammate. There was a time where Lucas Torreira dropped off near the halfway line and split Douglas Luiz and McGinn to find Aubameyang running off Gilbert, but he was unable to combine with Lacazette running across goal because his pass was sloppy. So as you can see, Aston Villa's approach without the ball was successful in the first half as they looked to clog out that midfield and David Luiz to ensure that those players couldn't combine with Arsenal's front three. But going forward, it was Jack Grealish who was involved in a lot of Aston Villa's Villa's quality moves, whether it be making darting runs in behind Bukayo Saka to deliver quality crosses. He ended up breaking in transition down that left channel, getting Cedric in a 1v1 situation and nearly scored from it. And even when you look to the build-up to Aston Villa's opener, it was Grealish who shifted to the left of Mings to clip the long ball into McGinn that forced David Luiz to concede the corner. So when we looked at the second half, we were expecting a tactical change from Arsenal, and they kind of looked like more of a 4-3-3 to start that half. What we ended up seeing was that Xhaka did replace Lucas Torreira, and what we saw from the central midfield was that now we had Dani, Ceballos, and Xhaka sort of operating as decoys by dropping off into the half spaces to allow Kolasinac and Cedric to push forward, and Bukayo Saka was positioning himself in between that gap between Douglas Luiz and Grealish or Trezeguet to look to receive the ball. Ultimately, Arsenal's tactical shift didn't improve their ability to create quality chances. It was still David Luiz pushing forward and sliding balls out into those wider areas, but they failed to get their three key attacking players involved. Likewise, we also saw Aston Villa shift their formation. They ended up moving to more of a 4-4-2 with McGinn helping Samata press from the front. So what we ended up seeing was that when David Luiz was stepping forward with the ball, McGinn would push into his path. That does leave Xhaka free in that half space, and we saw different variations as to how Aston Villa wanted to go about it. There were times where you ended up seeing McGinn simply shift over into the path of Xhaka to close him down, and if McGinn couldn't shift over into the path of Xhaka, what you would end up seeing was that Trezeguet could push forward, and that would see Gilbert step to Kolasinac and Konsa move across to Aubameyang. Roughly 15 minutes into that second half, we ended up seeing Arteta shift his formation once again, moving to a 4-2-4 by bringing on Tierney and Nicolas Pepe. The shift to a 4-2-4 didn't provide a solution for Arteta here because he still couldn't get the midfielders or the backline to provide a link of play to the attacking players. You had Nketiah and Aubameyang operating in between the fullbacks and the center backs, and then you had Cedric adopting a narrow advanced position with Pepe on the touchline, and we saw Aubameyang and Lacazette swap on that left-hand side to either occupy Gilbert or stay in that space between Konsa and Gilbert. So that front four was starved for service, and whenever they received the ball, they were congested in that midfield zone. And frankly, Arsenal's best outball was through Tierney, but whenever he did get forward, he was struggling to beat Gilbert, and when he did, his crosses never connected with his teammates. But as you can see, Aston Villa presented Arteta with several tactical issues here. They swarmed Torreira and Ceballos and ensured that David Luiz couldn't provide supply for Aubameyang, Lacazette, and Nketiah. Arsenal also have themselves to blame for their sloppy possession and the fact that Arteta did shift his tactical system on 2 occasions and they simply couldn't bypass that Aston Villa shape, and that's why you have to say that Aston Villa were fully deserving of all 3 points. Hi everybody, thanks for watching and subscribe here for your latest tactical analysis and daily commentary on the InnerViews show. And if that wasn't enough, don't forget you could find more organic, unfiltered soccer/football analysis on the InnerViews podcast, the best soccer/football podcast in the world, available on iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, and any Android apps on your Android devices.